Hey, Scott Jordan and Mark Warner here for Jancast number 86, February 11th. I think we can take these off, and we've already measured. For those of you that haven't seen previous shows, we did measure, and we are socially distanced properly. So first off, let me apologize for not having a show last week, right, Mark? It was, what was it?
We had Snowmageddon last week.
Snowmageddon 2001, not to be confused with Snowmageddon, whatever the previous one was.
Well, the previous one was 2001. This was Snowmageddon 2021.
I'm sorry, 2021. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, for those of you that like non-essential, non-important factoids to use tonight at the dinner table while you're playing Trivia Pursuit.
What's that?
It was actually called, the Snowmageddon 2001 was called the Groundhog Day storm.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And uniquely enough, this year, last week, was the exact 10-year anniversary of Snowmageddon, which happened really close to Groundhog's Day. and that's why we used the latitude of calling it Snowmageddon 2021, which was a term, by the way, that was coined by the Chicago folks when that storm hit in 2001.
Great
it stranded all the cars on the whatever it was, West Shore bypass or whatever they call it. So, but everybody was abandoning their cars, and I abandoned my car, but luckily it was parked in my driveway.
Well, it's been fun, and I think it's 38 days to spring. If it's not 38, it's 37. So it's not long now.
But who's counting?
Yeah, yeah. Not that I'm keeping track of it. But. So hey, anything exciting happening out there, COVID related?
Well,
Mark?
yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, the biggest concern, of course, has to do with the new strains.
Yeah.
And there's now 4 or more strains circulating.
Seems to be a lot of talk about, they're effective, no, they're not, depending upon if you listen to Fauci or you listen to somebody else. It seems like they don't have I guess it's not that easy for them to know.
Well, the biggest challenge that people aren't really aware of is that in order to do testing, you need to have a sample of the strain. And it becomes really difficult. I'm back with the West African Ebola outbreak several years ago. Part of the issue there with trying to get things developed in terms of vaccines or some preventative medicine was actually getting samples to test.
Right.
So with these new strains popping up, it's a matter of trying to figure out how to get them into the labs for testing.
Yep.
But the Wuhan virus strain, which we've all heard referred to in a number of ways, but ultimately that became known somewhat as the Italian strain, because it had such a big impact on Italy.
Oh, right.
That was kind of the first devastating impact beyond Wuhan, China. And then after that, of course, that strain landed in Seattle, Washington, and that's all we were dealing with for a while. Then we started hearing about the Great Britain strain, and that was much, much more contagious. Not more lethal, but much, much more contagious. But the good news on that, through the initial testing of vaccines, was that mutation did not affect whether or not the vaccines would work. Then we got another one that came out of both Brazil and Africa.
Yeah, those sound like they're a little bit more
They have developed a cloaking mechanism that allows them to try to hide from the body's immune system, which is how a vaccine works. It works by enhancing your immune system. So far, it hasn't cloaked itself well enough to avoid the vaccines from working, but the Dr. Fauci's biggest concern really is that it's evolving at a pretty rapid rate, and it seems that that's a direction it's trying to take to survive. And if it does get to that point, it will need a brand new vaccines, and of course, we all know how easy it is to get vaccines.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but let's talk about the Super Bowl. So I'm sitting there watching one of the great things about the Super Bowl is the advertisements. So we're sitting there watching, I'm sure you were watching it just like millions and millions of other people, and I see this ad for Microban. It's like, oh my God, that product is effective for 24 hours. I mean, that is, how come we don't have that at Bullet? I don't understand. But there's that 10 seconds in on that video. If you can do a search on Super Bowl ads, and you can watch every one of the videos, the advertisements, and it's a fun way to see the ones you thought you liked. But the Microban one, at 10 seconds in, says something about only affected viruses in the short period of time, and then they don't talk about anything else. So what do we have to say about that, other than fantastic product name and really, really great marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be wonderful if it did anything to any iota to help us shut down COVID-19.
Yeah.
However, it is equally as effective as any traditional disinfectant in an immediate application going through a disinfection process. The 24 that is often referred to as a 24-hour kill time has nothing to do with the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
It was only two bacteria there, right?
Yeah, it's
they
a
talked
virus.
Staph and one other.
Yeah, so the 24-hour kill claim is effective for going after bacteria, and that's not new technology.
Yeah.
And there's a number of different types of technology that are out there, quat-based as well as others that are, organosilicate-based. Different technologies.
Spears and knives, oh my.
Yeah, exactly. But they have nothing to do with the viruses.
Yeah.
It's all about bacteria. And the biggest issue that you and I have with things like that is that you can send the wrong message just by omitting certain facts and allowing people to draw a conclusion that's not accurate. And so my wife saw the ad and said, we need to get that.
Yeah, right.
Because we're worried about COVID.
Well, if you're in a supermarket and you're going down the disinfectant aisle.
And I said, that has nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah.
Our house is full of disinfectants
that
are effective on COVID. So we don't need to buy something that has a long-term kill claim on something that we're not concerned about right now.
Yeah.
So not trying to put anything down, but I think that there's it's
a little
like,
confusing.
Yeah, less than transparent message there about not keying on specific facts.
We know what we're talking about because this is kind of our business, but like you said, your wife said, "Oh, look at that," And I've had comments from family members as well that weren't in the same room with me. They said, "Did you see that ad for that Microban stuff?" So I was like, "Oh boy!" So they could essentially explain to them what we just explained. So a little disappointing, but the rest of the ads were good.
I think, truthfully, my ever-present optimism tells me that at some point I really think people are going to get into a much more transparent mode about what does and doesn't, and we'll get away from a lot of what we were seeing when we created the Germwashing.com site, which was not only claims where facts were being left out in order to have people draw the wrong conclusion, all in order to drive sales, but there were absolutely some false, even fraudulent claims that were being made by companies that in many cases were being manufactured outside the United States and not under the same, let's say, degree of scrutiny. And then with the overload that the EPA had coming at them this past year, dealing with COVID, there hasn't been as active an enforcement of false advertising on disinfectants that you and I grew up with. I mean, you didn't dot an I or cross a T. The EPA would bring it to your attention, correct? And there hasn't been a lot of that enforcement over the 2020, but as an optimist, I do believe that 2021 is kind of bringing a lot of this to the surface.
Well, the good news is we are going to feature on Germwashing.com a couple new ones that just came up this week. There's another airline, not unlike the other airline we've talked about, and we don't need to get into which one, but mysterious devices rolling down the aisle, spraying stuff that has some long protective aspect to it, similar to what we just talked about. So Germwashing.com. Check that out. There'll be some new stuff up there. So good news is apparently they're training dogs now to help out in our
Well, we've been looking for tools and equipment to help us speed up testing for a lot of reasons. Determine whether or not an environment is safe or whether or not somebody is symptomatic of COVID-19. And they've got dogs that have been trained to sniff out bombs and drugs, and apparently dogs have the ability to sniff out or detect whether somebody is infectious with COVID-19. So that's very, very believable. Of course, there's some other claims out there that are less than believable.
Yes, yeah, we'll maybe report on them. We're still digging into a couple
We're
of those.
still digging into a few that you can actually point to somebody 8 miles away and it'll tell you whether or not they've got the sniffles or something. I'm not really sure.
Sounds very promising if they can make it work. But the good news is we don't know how your vaccine situation's going in your particular part of the country, but in this area, we're just knocking it out of the ballpark, aren't we?
Well, knocking it out of the ballpark. So we're in phase 1A.
Yep.
And phase 1A is aimed at healthcare workers only. The Bullen Company's employees, you and me, are anxious to get into phase 1B.
In Delaware County, we're talking about.
Right,
now.
outside of Philly.
Yep.
And we're considered to be essential industries because we do produce disinfectants and sanitizers that aid in the attack on COVID-19. So we're part of that front line of defense mechanism thing. So we're kind of looking at when's 1B going to come along.
Yeah.
So we started doing some simple math, Scott. And there were 250,000 people in 1A.
Eligible people. So that's
in 1A.
That's only in Delaware County.
Yes. And so in the last month, Scott, how many did they successfully vaccinate?
Wait for it. Wait. 2,500, 2,700?
So 2,500 versus 250,000. That means 1% a month. We're probably going to get lined up in 100 months.
Oh yeah, but keep in mind we're in the next group.
But
the next
Scott,
group is 70,000 more.
100 months is 8.5 years from now.
But it could be more. Could be a little bit more because we're in the second group, which is 70,000 on top of the 250.
But we'll be in front of that line instead of at the end, with a little luck.
Well,
so anyway, the vaccine thing is a big issue, but I'm really glad to see everybody putting a lot of effort towards fixing that.
Yeah.
And they've converted an awful lot of stadiums into large vaccination sites, things that LA did. In the very beginning, they did it with the help and sponsorship of Sean Penn, if I recall.
Yeah.
And the fact that that was a successful platform to get a lot of vaccinations, I'm kind of glad to see that happening all throughout the country because it needed to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be 8.5 years away for getting a vaccine that's going to be gone in 2.
Well, hopefully some of the new vaccines that are coming on, the Johnson & Johnson one is supposedly any moment now, so that'll help. Otherwise, I guess we just have to hope for herd immunity before we actually get a vaccine.
That's true. And then ultimately, when they figure out how to put vaccine into beer, we'll be able to actually spread that around the country in no time flat.
Well,
and I can think of the name of the beer there, Scott.
I was going to say, that takes me back to one of the original COVID updates, which was one of the big hits, 60,000 downloads. I don't know if it was because of the sprayer thing I featured on, which we'll talk about briefly, or the Corona beer, which doesn't have anything to do with it.
But would that be great marketing for Corona beer?
Ooh, yeah.
Would be to include a vaccine in it. Anyway,
buy that stock. Okay, well, we got a couple other things, but I know we're moving along here. We're going to talk briefly about should you hold your breath or not. It's worthwhile, but it's not going to save you.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody sneezes nearby, hold your breath.
Yeah.
But in reality, with airflow and dispersion and all that, wearing a mask is by a mile 10 times more effective.
Yeah.
Because the last person I met that could hold his breath for like 10 or 15 minutes, I've never met
Houdini?
anybody. I just don't think it's possible.
Or David Blaine.
Yes, well, I met David Blaine.
Yes, right.
So
that's some of the news, but we need to talk about, the next thing that's coming is businesses are hopefully going to start opening up on a more regular basis, and we talked on the previous show about what we're calling extreme cleanliness, and we wanted to get into that a little bit more. So Mark, you're kind of the expert on this, so could you walk us through kind of how that's going to work and what affect, it's not just about disinfecting, it's about a whole lot more.
Yeah, it's because of human perception of what's clean and safe to enter. And you're not necessarily seeing people disinfecting. They're doing that at night or off shift. And the reality is that you're making your own judgment calls on whether something's safe to enter or safe to be in, based on your judgment of how clean it appears. So you're looking at the floors, and you're looking at the carpets, and you're looking at above the floor surfaces like glass and push panels on doors, and you're looking for smudges and fingerprints and degraded areas, because if you're finding that, you're assuming this place is not being kept clean.
Right.
If it's not being kept clean, how can I assume I'm safe in here that some professional came in and disinfected it? So the need has never been stronger for extreme cleanliness. So one of the lessons that we want to teach people on this is that it goes beyond the use of disinfectants. There are a lot of studies done by supermarkets over the years to determine how they could create a perception of being the cleanest supermarket in town. Because it's known that shoppers in supermarkets will make a judgment call on where they go based on its degree of cleanliness. So they did studies, and they took a store that had immaculate floors, and yet above the floor they let it slightly deteriorate. They let some fingerprinting get shown, some smudging on stainless, maybe even a little dusting on can tops or shelves, but deliberately let it degrade a little bit, but had a spotless floor. Then they took a second store and they did the opposite. On that second store, they had everything above the floor was meticulously done, polished, no fingerprints, crystal clear glass, no lights missing or out, everything dusted, shelves clean, but they let the floors degrade. And we all know, as professionals in the cleaning industry, that was probably the cleaner store, because everything above the floor, it had such attention paid to it. Yet everybody that came out of those stores during those surveys would say that the store with the best looking floor was the cleanest store. And so that drove the effort for supermarkets to invest $250,000 into their floor care.
Yeah, that's why Walmart's floors look so spectacular in Walmart.
Exactly. So that is perceived to be one of the biggest influencers on the perception of clean. And we don't want to ignore carpets. You could have a wonderful glossy floor, but if the carpet in the building has traffic lanes, or it's got spots in the carpet that you're seeing week after week, and you know that they're still there, I mean, that's a skeevy feeling. It's like, it looks like long-term soil. So carpet care comes into play there as well. But with that said about floors, the average person is making judgment calls on, they think it's all about what they see, and yet professionals in the Jansan industry know something else, don't we, Scott?
Odors and your sense of smell compared to some of your other senses is extremely, extremely sensitive. So the odors are very, very important. So I think our point is, as we're coming out of this and businesses are opening up, it's not just disinfecting, it's creating an environment that your whole facility is perceived as clean. And you can't forget about something as simple as odors, because that's something you're going to, if you can't see the floors or whatever, you're not interested in looking at the floors, your nose is going to pick up some bad odors before you even see them, or you're even remotely close. How many times you've been to a restaurant and you can smell the bathroom over the cooking? It's like, that isn't going to work. Nobody's ever going to come back to that place. So you got to take it into the whole picture, which is where extreme cleanliness really kind of tries to cover.
And the tie in there to odors, which is fascinating, is that the average person does not realize that the sense of smell is overpowering what they see in determining whether or not they feel something is clean. But think about it. If you walk into a beautiful restaurant and you get a whiff of bad meat or a whiff of the bathroom, you're not perceiving it as being clean, even though it might be spotless looking. And the other hand is that, you might go into a truck stop that might not be meticulously clean, but the smells of the food and the baking bread and hot apple pie freshly cooked, and all those things give you a perception that, this looks good. You just sweep the crumbs off and you sit down and eat, But we use that analogy a lot rather than talk about bathrooms, but it's so true about bathrooms.
Yep.
You can go into a very heavily used bathroom, but if you aren't picking up odors, you're assuming it's heavily used but clean.
Yeah.
But you could go into one that looks spotless, and if you're getting urine odors and other odors, you're not perceiving it as being clean, even though your eyes are telling you it is.
Yep, no.
So the most powerful sense we have that will give us a subjective opinion on whether or not something is clean is the sense of smell.
Well, subjective is one thing, but we really need something that's objective. So
I love the segue.
So you can actually measure it. Otherwise, it's how do you feel today, Mark? Maybe you're not feeling good and you think this place just stinks or whatever. It's, again, subjective. So we need to find the objective part, and that's where equipment comes in.
Well, it comes in because here's the next step. The next step is that we need to be able to create a metric or a benchmark on the level of clean that we have. So if you are considering changing chemicals, changing equipment, changing your labor allocation, our advice to you is don't change anything until you've done some form of audit, a cleanliness audit, a cleanliness audit to give you a metric or a benchmark of where you are. Then make any and all changes you want to make and come back 6, 9, 12 months later and do another audit and be able to show a metric that displays that you've improved in how your level of cleanliness is coming along, or it will uncover weaknesses if you've not improved on your level of cleanliness. So the question comes up is, how do you do that? Do you walk around looking and smelling? Well, that's subjective. And nowadays, there are accredited auditing professionals that are accredited through the ISSA to be professional auditors in the degree of cleanliness. And they're taught how to use very specific scientific equipment. Things like this. So, of course, in order to measure things, you have to have tools and equipment. Some of the most common tools that maybe we all grew up with were things as simplistic as a black light. You take a stamp of invisible ink, put it on a surface, and then later the supervisor would come in to see if that surface had been cleaned. He pulls out a black light, shines it on the table. If he can find that mark, it means the task was skipped. It was not done. It's also used in healthcare to make sure that the disinfection process on an operating table was performed. It's how we used to do it. Many of you may have seen TV shows like CSI, where they were using black lights to determine residues of blood or body fluids that might be in a crime scene. But we also use them in bathrooms because other types of body fluids can splash or make their way to the floor. They can become the source of odor, and they may not necessarily be highly visible to the naked eye, but they can't hide from a black light. That's the early days. That's where we came from. Nowadays, we have the ways of quantifying this kind of stuff. So there are things like ATP meters, which can determine the amount of adenosine triphosphate that's left on the surface. And you may be wondering, what's adenosine triphosphate? Well, it's called ATP, and it's actually the bacteria it's a form of protein that's in bacteria. So if you detect the presence of that, you're also detecting the presence of bacteria, and it creates a number that tells you how clean that surface is, or how many living microorganisms are there or not there. Another way of creating a metric. Good one. The other thing that we do is we use an indoor air quality meter. And you may think that we're using that to determine the quality of, let's say, the air you're breathing, but that's not exactly how it's used. Most people don't realize that carpet is an indoor air filter. Clean carpet filters air, and so an air quality meter held close to a floor will have a low reading if the carpet is clean, and it'll have a high reading if the carpet is dirty, and yet that carpet may visibly appear to look identical, because carpet hides soil. So how do you determine if there's hidden soil? Using an air quality meter. The other things that we see coming along technology-wise is hyperspectral imaging, which are cameras. They have the ability to take a picture of a surface and irradiate or cause to glow any bacterium or pathogenic microorganisms that are present after the cleaning process. Now, those cameras are worth thousands of dollars nowadays, but they are saying that 5 years from now, it's not inconceivable that it might be a 99-cent app on your iPhone. Some of the other equipment you see here ties into ways we measure the chemistry. For example, a carpet cleaning product is only good if it prevents resoiling from rapidly reoccurring. Otherwise, you're just engaging in exercise, cleaning the same spot over and over again. We use a scope like this. Is called a scalar scope. We run it at 400 power, and we can actually see the soil on the carpet fiber. In order to test products, we'll run them through something called a Snell capsule, where there's soil in there, and we can see whether the products are resisting grabbing on and holding on to fresh soil. Other things that get used in floor care are things like this, which is a gloss meter that determines what is the nature of the coating. Is it worn out, in which case there'll be no depth of gloss, the film depth is gone, or is it highly durable, in which case the gloss will remain even after traffic. Another way of testing floor finish's integrity is through a slip meter. A meter like this is used to determine what is the slip coefficient, or how much is that floor finish resisting being slippery, and that's an indication of how much coating is there. Moisture meters are also used. A lot of different types of carpet cleaners, some that you may be familiar with on the consumer side, can actually create a reading on a moisture meter days after they were used, meaning that there is some kind of potentially damp, sticky, tacky residue that's being left behind. And of course, there's many others, which we're looking forward to showing you, things like static testing equipment and so on. Looking forward to showing you the rest of that in the days and weeks and months and years and decades to come. Long live Jancast.com.
Very informative. Yep. So that's what you need. You just can't make stuff up out of the air. You got to have some benchmark to be able to measure these things. So I think some of those pieces of equipment does a great job for that. And it's things like slips and falls and things like that don't involve COVID or anything else, but that's all part of the package there. So. And
we're going to be doing more on that in the weeks to come regarding additional equipment like ATP meters and hyperspectral imaging cameras.
Yep.
All of that will probably get woven into a section we call cleaning tips.
That's right. And we had one before, so we have another one. So it's a cleaning chemistry tips.
Yes.
Number 2, we're going to call this one.
We're calling this one number 2, but this is a segue to the number 1. See, we did a demonstration of chemistry showing that water has surface tension, and that a very good cleaning chemical has got something in it called a surfactant, or surface acting agent. And so what we showed is that surface tension in a cup of water, and we showed that there was so much surface tension you could float a paperclip.
Yep.
And when you added a little surfactant, it just dropped out. Well, we had hundreds of replies to that, which we thank you very much for. But one specifically from Kansas City was very revealing, and that was that Kansas City is a very laid-back community, and they were very concerned that their water, since they exist without a lot of stress, their water may not have any stress or tension either. And so they were a little concerned about that. They attempted to duplicate the demonstration, and their poor paperclip drowned right away. They actually created a life preserver for their paperclip,
make up for the lack of surface tension. Very smart.
Very smart.
Because God forbid we lose too many paper clips.
So this week we thought we would give you a different example of how surfactants can aid in eliminating the surface tension of water, which aids in its ability to penetrate. And you have to penetrate soil in order to remove it.
Yep. Let's take a look at that.
So based on the demo that we did last week, we were told that in some parts of the country, like Kansas City, they're pretty laid back and they really don't have any stress. And they are worried that their water has no tension. So I've decided to show you another way to demonstrate what a surfactant does. You can see the surface tension of water there. It just beads right up. And all I need to do is take a little bit of high performance surfactant. This is our AirX 101, and just a drop allows that water to spread and to penetrate into the surface. What that means is a surfactant allows a cleaning agent to penetrate into soils to more deeply clean it. How's that for a demo?
Well, I think that's excellent view. You can really see what's going on there in that video. So
we have more to come.
Yes, we have more to come. Well, okay, we're running a little long, so we have to remind people that down below or above on this video, there'll be a link for you to subscribe. So if you know people, preferably 2 people, tell 2 people about this show, and that'll allow us to expand our viewership, get more feedback, and everything else that is all important for getting the knowledge out there.
And remember, that's called a geometric progression. Yep. One tells 2 people, they tell 2 people, they tell 2 people.
It's kind of like the way germs are.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, thanks everybody for watching.
Yep.
I think we have to get back to work.
Yep. Thank you.